Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about Boku no Hero Academia, but before we do that, buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we like to talk about games and movies, and I guess today is our inaugural anime
Yeah, I mean,
episode.
we
I don't know
watched
that we,
Ghost in the Shell and the Death Note, but those were live action, so technically doesn't count.
yeah. This is front to back anime, even though I'm absolutely going to end up referencing a million things that are not anime. But yeah, so Boku no Hero Academia just ended its third season. We watched everything, so all 63 episodes.
I haven't watched the movie. Have you watched the movie?
I have not watched the movie.
Okay, so not quite everything, but
Yeah, and then we also I watched mostly dubs, except for the last 3 episodes, I think, or 4 episodes, which were subs only for me. And
uh,
then you watch mostly
I
subs.
watched entirely subs. I've watched a
Okay.
couple clips with dubs, but yeah, I'm a generally a subs person, if only because it tends to come out faster when I'm actively watching a series. Um,
Is there anything we want to do before a spoiler warning?
um, I mean,
I think Boku no Hero Academia is like a good show, I guess. I would definitely recommend it to people. But I
yeah,
have a lot of criticisms, and I'm probably going to be very mean to it over the course of this episode. And I'm sure that I'm going to receive plenty of flack from from the
fans.
audience. Yeah,
uh,
because I don't know how fair my criticisms will be.
yeah. Well, I guess we'll get into that. Yeah, I absolutely adore the show. I don't know. I kind of like to describe it as like a good Naruto. I will throw shade at Naruto so that we can both get some shade thrown back at us. But other than that, I think it's time to dive into spoiler territory. Um, Spoilers from here on out for Boku no
Yes.
Hero Academia or My Hero Academia or My Hero Academy or whatever you call it.
I actually had a friend of mine who got very angry about calling it Boku no Hero Academia because apparently the creator, whoever that is, um, that was the reason that he named it like My Hero Academia, and it is like, and the name is like anglicized already, sort of thing. Um, was to be like appealing to kind of like Western audiences in a way that I don't know some of the other kind of like hardcore uh, for Japanese eyes only anime aren't or whatever. And so the idea that we're all sitting around calling it Boku no Hero Academia is actually more off-putting than just calling it what he intended us to call it in My Hero Academia.
Yeah, whatever. I
Yeah.
mean, I actually kind of like the convention of calling it Boku no Hero Academia when you're referring to the subs and My Hero Academia when you're referring to the dubs. Um,
Well, that's not the worst thing in the world, I guess.
yeah. Um, but there's also that great there's like an alignment chart for what you call it. And my favorites are Green Naruto and Macadamia. So occasionally I go with
Yeah.
those. I'll try and put a link to that in the description. So I know you've got a lot to do, especially concerning what like Young Justice is what you always compare it to. So
Yeah,
so what?
my basic thesis with this, and what I actually find very interesting about the show, is how dated it feels to me because I am a like kind of like I have watched this show 100 times, except it's always been Western animation, right? Um, and the thing I keep comparing it to is Young Justice, just because it's kind of like the most recent of these. But that's actually not a super fair comparison. Like I think Young Justice is a better show. I'll just kind of like front load that. But I think it's a better show because it is in the same way that I've talked about some other stuff before. Like it's standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Like this is a an archetype of show, kind of like a teenage superhero show. This is an archetype of show that has 20 years of history in the United States, right? And in mainstream Western animation, right? And beyond that, it has 60 years of history in mainstream American comic books, which like take influence from that, because it's not just Young Justice, right? It is Spectacular Spider-Man, it's X-Men Evolution, it's Static Shock, it's going all the way back to Batman the Animated Series, the new Superman show, the Justice League Unlimited, right? Like all of these shows, you just kind of go all the way back. So something like Young Justice kind of gets to be better because it has that groundwork already laid for it. Whereas Boku no Hero Academia is clearly introducing a lot of these sort of American superhero concepts to a Japanese audience in a way. Um, and mixing it up and then kind of like putting it in like a mixing bowl with just kind of like typical shonen anime tropes, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say you talk about you talk about it having a long history in America, but shonen anime and manga have also have a super long history, and I think this is a very excellent shonen manga or shonen anime, and I think that kind of it hits that cross point in a weird in a different way, which I think is good
Yeah.
for it, right? I think partially that's why it's resonating so well with Western audiences as well, because I know a lot of people who watch this, even though like the typical weebs, as I would call them, sometimes tend to turn their nose up at the more mainstream stuff that comes
Oh,
out.
really?
At least in my experience, right? It's
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I do think that it is a show that if you are, shall I say, gaijin, is easier to kind of like walk into. I had a much easier time watching this show, obviously, than something like Attack on Titan, which I also like. I mean, I think Attack on Titan is really good, but that is much more. I don't know. It's a lot less accessible, I suppose I would say.
Yeah. I don't. I think I feel like Attack on Titan's accessibility issues aren't precisely the fault of the how do I want to put this? They're not precisely the fault of the show itself, but they're the fault of, or rather, how do I put this? It's not the fault of the genre; it's the fault of the show being a little bit more complex than your typical kind of show in this genre. If that makes sense.
That's fair. I obviously don't watch a lot of anime. I mean, I have watched a lot of anime like as a kid. This is the other kind of thing. Like I've watched all of Dragon Ball Z front to back. So a lot of this stuff is very a lot of this stuff keys into that sort of like lock in my mind, or any of the Yu-Gi-Oh or Zoids or whatever else kind of any of those like Toonami anime that I watched as a kid. So I feel like I do have a pretty good basis for these sorts of things. But the big comparison point for me has been Young Justice for the majority of my time watching Boku no Hero Academia. Just because Young Justice is on my mind. I had to end up going back and just watching it because it just kept reminding me of it. And it also has a similar sort of plot structure because Young Justice is also about kind of an ensemble of young heroes who are learning from professional, grown-up heroes, and trying to kind of like be better, and learn stuff and be good. Though Young Justice doesn't quite have a school format, so it is a little bit.
Yeah, I think that school format. I think some of the things that make Boku no Hero Academia special are kind of the exploration, and the deconstruction of kind of the superhero genre in a way, right? Like, maybe it's very Japanese, but to my eyes, it feels very just deconstructionist in that, like, he's like, like I mentioned in our previous episode, it feels like the Tippyverse for superheroes, right? Like, there's a lot of thought gone into like how the world changes around a world where being a superhero isn't only like a thing that's like, or like interacting with a superhero isn't only not particularly rare, but it's very common in like, what is it, like 80% of the population has latent powers?
I think the most interesting piece of that is how kind of communalized and collectivized superheroes are in this Japanese society. Like, yeah, you need a license and registration, right? Where in Western animation about superheroes, that is always a huge deal, right? I mean, Civil War is practically an entire comic about how that is a fundamentally bad idea. then we shouldn't force our superheroes to do that, and that, you know, superheroes being free so that they can kind of save people whenever they want is like the right sort of approach to things. Justice League Unlimited has a whole series about how, you know, the Justice League puts a satellite into space and is teleporting everywhere with it, and they also have this orbital laser kind of from it, and so the government is creating clone superheroes in Cadmus in order to kind of like undermine the power of like Superman and stuff, because they don't trust that Superman will always be, you know, will always kind of be around. There's a lot more skepticism towards like the government and governmental systems in Western stuff than in the Japanese portrayal of these superheroes, which I thought was very interesting.
Sure. I mean, I think part of that too is that you know, even in like these things you're talking about, superheroes aren't so prevalent, right? Like I said, it's like, I think it's something like 80% of the population gets a power in BNH, and you know, not everybody's a practicing hero,
right? The mutants are like a persecuted minority, right?
Yeah.
So
whereas they're like an embraced way of life in BNH. So much so, like I like a lot of these little details, right? Like the fact that the top school not only has a hero course but has a support course for like the people who like build gear. And like a business course, and we also see like there's like professional victims that hire themselves out for training purposes, and all that jazz. In fact, it seems like it's that the society's so built around the quirks, as they call them, that it feels weird that like obviously there's a lot of normal stuff that happens that you see in the background, like that's kind of like the background for what's it, Uhara, I think is her name, the female lead.
Uraraka.
Yeah, Uraraka. But like if like we never, that's the only part that like maybe I would like to see just a little bit more, so it feels less like every aspect of the show seems to be some part of the superhero universe basically that consumes it, and not a lot of and such deep exploration that we don't really see a lot of like who they're actually serving. Right, like if you only watch the show, or like if you didn't think about it, you'd think that like this entire world was just like heroes saving other heroes, which is clearly not the case.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't really know where else to where do you want to start? I think season 1 is bad. I guess should we just start at the beginning?
Oh, yeah, let's start at the beginning.
And it's mostly bad, I think, for shonen anime reasons, and
I think it's good
because it takes too long. It takes fucking forever.
I mean, it takes a while, but it's all about building up the characters in a way that like you don't have any sort of cultural recognition of these characters in any way, right? Like in a typical superhero show, you're at least familiar with who the characters are. You don't have to establish anything about them, or rather.
I don't think that's true. I just think that you can be efficient with your time in a way. I think like typically what happens in like the Western animation show is you'll get a two-parter to start off a show. Like Batman Beyond does this, X-Men Evolution does this. You'll kind of capstone a season with a two-parter, and then you'll begin a season with a two-parter. And a two-parter will typically do everything that the first 13 episodes of Boku no Hero Academia does, but in 45 minutes rather than in however much time. Like I was going fucking insane. By like episode 5, he wasn't even in at the beginning of episode 5 is right when he got admitted to the school, and I was like, are you fucking kidding me? You know, like the first 4 episodes he doesn't even have powers. I also think that Deku sucks in the beginning, mostly just because like he keeps whining and crying and not doing things.
I mean, the point is he does do things, right? Like he does more than anybody else is willing to do when everybody else is kind of like standing down and being held back by bureaucracy. He runs in and saves Bakugo, or at least, you know, like causes an opening and inspires All Might, and that's why All Might decides to pass One for All on to him.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just felt like you could have done that way faster. I
actually
have a lot.
That's all. That's all in like the first episode, isn't it?
No, that's what? No, that's like the first 3 episodes. I think at the end of the second episode, he gets All Might says he's going to give him the power, and then the third episode
is him training.
Gets it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's him training so he can take the entrance exam. Um, yeah, so the first episode is why he's not qualified to be a superhero. Second episode is him getting the power. I don't know. That doesn't feel that slow to me. It feels like it was an appropriate character build-up.
So I actually also think that this is actually like an interesting sort of media adaptation thing. I have a lot of problems with the pacing of Boku no Hero Academia, and I think it comes specifically from the way that like manga gets adapted in Japan. And okay, this is like okay. So if you're like a longtime reader of comics, fight scenes in comics are actually harder to do than in animation because they are typically like wordless and there's not a lot of text, right? And the problem is if you have a textless fight scene, people just, you know, look at an image, turn the page, look at an image, turn the page kind of thing, right? They just kind of breeze through it. And so what you do in order to pace a comic or manga is you put text on the page to slow a person down and get them to take that fight scene at a normal pace, right? And typically the way that this represents itself, excuse me, is in voiceover, right? You have an internal monologue or something where somebody is kind of is talking directly to the reader or the audience or whatever, and narrating. And there is definitely that in, I can tell that there's that in the manga, and there's definitely that in a lot of like, you know, even Western comics do this all the time, right? Because you just need to you need to slow people down, otherwise they're just going to breeze through your comic and find it really unfulfilling or whatever, right? The problem I find is that when you adapt manga to an anime, it feels like they do this thing where they also adapt in that voiceover, which I think is bad because it is slowing down the pacing of these fights when it shouldn't be. Like the fights can.
I see your point. And I don't know. I don't think I agree with you. And I think part of this too is that like, Bakugo, unlike not Bakugo, Deku, unlike most kind of these protagonists, is the tactician kind of archetype, right? Like that's Armin in Attack on Titan, or like Shikamaru in Naruto. And in order for those characters to really fully realize, you need those moments because the draw of their characters is partially their like tactical analysis.
I mean, sure,
and you don't
but
really...
it happens with everybody. I think it happens all the time in this show.
I think it happens less with other characters, mostly because you don't go inside of most other characters' heads during the fights. But like I think that's like a big part. I think that's a big part of what makes this show like special, is that like most characters are at least a little bit smart. As opposed, like, you know, Bakugo is the prime example of this. And Deku is the tactician, right? He's usually the side character that like explains things off on the sidelines while the fight is happening, but he's the actual main character, which is a very different thing about this show. And that requires kind of a little bit of that introspection, because that's what like lets him get a leg up in a lot of situations, is his kind of like obsessive note taking and ability to kind of analyze situations in a rational way. And
see, I feel like it happens more than just with Deku. It definitely happens with Deku, and I appreciate it when it is sort of like tactical to a certain extent. Like, I think that is interesting, but I think that there are plenty of times when it's not, and they take a moment and then they stretch it a bunch in order to insert this internal monologue. Because like, so when you're in an active audiovisual medium, right, you don't need to slow down the pacing like that. And in fact, it actually slows down the pacing a lot, because what you have to do is you have to essentially pause the action on screen, except it's not actually paused. It typically just goes into like hyper slow motion. Yeah. So that someone can have a voiceover and explain what they're doing to the audience. And I think that's not good. And that contributes to a lot of my pacing issues with Boku no Hero Academia. And in fact, I think that's something it inherits kind of from shonen anime, because it's kind of the equivalent of in Dragon Ball Z, you know, they exchange a couple of blows, and then it's just like a still on Goku's face as his mind is racing, and he's like, "This is the hardest person I've ever fought," or whatever it is, like that kind of thing. I would concede that Boku no Hero Academia is better about this than something like Dragon Ball Z, where that stuff isn't quite like just absolute dead weight. There is value in it, I would definitely say, but it is value at the expense of plot and at the expense of kind of the excitement of of the scenes, and just as often as it was like a hype building thing or something where you were like, oh my god, how is I don't know, how is All Might gonna defeat the Nomu, how is All Might gonna defeat All in One, how is Bakugo going to get out of this one, or whatever, like whatever the situation sort of is. It was also just, why are we wasting our time with this? Like, why are we pulling this moment apart when we could just be moving? I can get it. I see what's going on. You don't have to explain it to me. Like,
I don't know. I didn't feel that. I also didn't have these pacing problems that you did. Maybe you're just impatient, buddy. You're an impatient American that can't appreciate. It's a trope
of anime. I think a lot of anime does this.
Yeah,
because it happens in Attack on Titan just as often.
Yeah, and it also, like, I feel like a lot of things that would be like an episode in a Western cartoon are like 5 to 6 episode arcs in animes.
And I super feel that, and it's part of what makes it so like frustrating, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's maybe part of the draw to like to the people that enjoy anime over Western animation, that like it feels how do I want to put this, like meatier maybe, because there's so much time given to all these pieces. I know I enjoy, and that's I don't know. You say you don't watch much anime, and maybe this is part of it, right? Maybe you just don't like the kind of the how do I want to put it? The kind of like the long gaze that goes on because of this style. And I don't think that there's obviously anything wrong with that. It's just it's probably just a preference thing at that point.
I mean, I think there is it always feels cheap to me, like cliffhangers and stuff like that. And it feels to me sometimes like, I don't know, there's just episodes of this that kind of begin in the middle and end in the middle and have no structure, and that's bad. Especially around kind of like bigger, elongated fights or whatever, like those couple of fights at the end of season 1 and kind of, I guess, in the middle of season 2 or whatever. Anytime that there's like a big multi-episode fight scene, a lot of the time I feel as though that doesn't I don't know. I guess I think episodes should have like a structure. They should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, even if they are part of like a larger, wider arc, right? They should establish things for later, right? And they should fit into a season-long arc, or even half-season arcs, or kind of like whatever the case may be, or whatever. But I get frustrated when an episode kind of begins in the middle of the action, and then that action is exactly the, because it's just like, it's like they've taken they've taken a movie and split it up into like 18-minute chunks.
Yeah, I feel that. I also feel that like Boku no Hero Academia is pretty good about like at least resolving like a minor battle within each. Like,
it is probably pretty good at it, because there are a lot of the times where it will end on a cliffhanger. Oh, okay, you're supposed to get civilians. Here's Gang Orca. He's the villain,
right?
Guy, you got to fight him next time. So that that sort of stuff. And especially around. I guess especially around season 3, I felt like it was better about that. That first fight, I felt like was not very good.
See, I'm going to disagree, because I think that like the All Might's fight with Nomu, I think all resolves within the same episode, right? Like each the whole fight in the training facility takes a couple of episodes, handful of episodes, but like each individual sub battle is resolved within its own episode, and like maybe it's teased the end of the previous episode, but like like the thing where Froppy, Deku, and Mineta need to deal with all the sea villains, like that all is dealt with in the span of that episode. And so like I get your point, but I think that Boku no Hero Academia is actually pretty good at making sure at least a conflict gets it's not like Dragon Ball where he charges up for 4 episodes. It's just kind of like piecing the battle out over for like the entirety of the fight over 4 or 5 episodes.
Do I agree with that? I don't know. That's rough. I guess. It's definitely, it's sure. Okay, fine. It's definitely better than Dragon Ball Z. But I feel like Dragon Ball Z, or like Naruto, or what, like whatever of these kind of, I guess I would call them trashier, even if we all thought that they were great, or we all do think they are great. It's better than those, but by how much is kind of like questionable.
Sure. Yeah, I know. So
and I definitely feel like it kind of like fails that a little bit. Though I guess I don't want to get like too wrapped up in this. So like those are that's kind of like those are my big criticisms of Boku no Hero Academia. I also think Deku sucks in the first season and gets good in seasons 2 and 3.
I think that's the point.
Yeah, I mean, okay, maybe. I think specifically he just needs... The problem with the first season is that it takes so long to get to the other classmates. And even when you do get to the other classmates, they don't really get like fleshed out and create any dynamics among themselves really until season 2. So it's kind of like having, the first... This is actually a bad example because the first 50 pages of Lord of the Rings is literally just about Frodo. But a lot of the times you have this kind of normal quote unquote character. Like Deku is a very pretty straightforward character. There's not a lot going on. I don't think he's incredibly interesting, but that's kind of the point because he's Frodo, he's Winnie the Pooh, right? He is just kind of anchoring the ensemble, and all of the interesting characters sort of rotate around him. And so that's why part of the problem with that first season is that it takes so long to get to these people. Obviously, you get Bakugo right off the bat. But until you have Todoroki and Yaoyorozu and Uraraka and Ida, right, to like kind of really, here are like the interesting personalities with a lot of texture. When you get into that, that's when I feel like the show is like, all right, I'm on board. Let's do this, right? Kirishima is this guy, and Mineta is this guy, even though Mineta is the worst. And boy, he's gross.
But he's supposed to be, right? Like,
no, I know. I think this is just like I don't think Japan has had the same kind of like cultural awakening that the United States has had in the past, I don't know, 10, 15 years. But that, like, pervy stuff, I just find incredibly off-putting. Like, I was like, oh, get it out of here. I can't deal with it sometimes.
Yeah, no, and I get that. And, like Mineta is supposed to be the worst, but I do,
I appreciate that he gets called out on it.
Yeah.
And then
but he also gets partially validated on it. Right, like
yeah.
It's like I guess wanting to get women is a valid excuse to be a superhero or something.
And it's just oh god, I don't know. That was every time that happened, I was just like, I felt like I was watching like Revenge of the Nerds or something.
Sure.
It's like something from like the '80s that we all thought was like kind of like funny, but now when we look back on it with like a modern understanding of I don't know, like consent and stuff like that. It's just like, oh god, this is like gross. And so Mineta doing stuff like the pool one is the one that I was just like, oh, gross. Like they go through this whole thing to try and trick themselves into getting into the pool with the female students, so that they can like ogle them or whatever. I was just like, god damn it, why?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I get that, and I get that that it's gross, but it is also kind of like an accurate representation of a lot of teenage boys, right? Like,
yeah, I guess so.
I'm not saying I don't like him. I like he's a character that's built to be hated, right? And like to be like,
I think that's very true.
And like occasionally have like his moments of glory when you don't expect it. Also, fun fact, according to like one of the official guys, he's canonically like the smartest character.
Really?
This isn't like it's like there's like a guide with like like number ratings on each of like the stats on the heroes, and
okay.
And like it's like scale of 5, and Meta is the only 5 intelligence character. Like
Wow.
Deku's at like a 4, which is weird because like you again, given that Deku is a tactician character, you would expect him to have the highest intelligence stat too. But I feel like they had to give something to Mineta. Like I feel like most of the heroes, like a lot of their stuff makes sense in kind of like a way, but like Mineta all feels like he's shoehorned in somehow because like his power isn't like super useful. On face, and he has to be very creative with it, and he's not like super creative with it in the beginning, right? Like it's not
This
like
is actually something. Yeah, this is actually something that I find interesting / kind of like fridge logic-y about anime like this. Because a lot of the times they do frame themselves around like, oh, UA is the most prestigious institution. You have to be the best of the best in order to get to UA, kind of thing. But then when you actually get there, it's a very typical classroom, right? Because I think that they want to, they don't want to make this a best of the best institution, really, right? They want it to be a very normal kind of classroom, really, so that, like, if you are a Japanese school kid, you would be like, oh, that looks just like my school,
Sure,
you know what I mean? And so I frequently think about how the fuck did some of these people make it into, like, the top school ever, right? Like Hiroshima or whatever the electricity guy's name is.
well, well, that's all that entrance exam, right? Like, which I think is kind of like the big thing for most of them is that like there are parts where like they did exceptionally well, like, like the electricity guy, like it makes sense that he would be able to defeat a bunch of things and thus place well on the practical. And he's only like really stupid when he's overcharged himself. Even though he's not.
No, I mean, I think the show depicts him as kind of like baseline stupid,
right?
Because he fails one of the other exams or whatever, like along with like a couple of people.
Sure, and like, but like,
I don't know, like maybe this is just me being something of an like elitist or something, but I do know what it feels like to go for like a best of the best kind of institution, and I do think that it produces a different dynamic than just your typical high school kind of, your typical school and classroom or whatever.
Sure, but you all, like, I don't know. I think the other half of that is it's also like going for the best of the best kind of football team, which is also different. I don't know. I feel that I feel like that's like also a part of like they kind of explicitly criticize it in the tournament, right? The mind control guy that Deku goes against in like the first round and almost loses to.
Oh yeah, he's like
yeah,
I don't have a quirk that's really good for the practical, so what could I do?
Yeah, or like that somebody in like one of the upper like the teachers comments that's the case, and maybe like this is why the practical isn't great. Which I think is it's neat, right? Like obviously we see him at the end of the third season and he's bulked up and he's he's ready to go and he's in the superhero class, which I think is cool. I think I really do appreciate these kind of like this attention to like I feel like a lot of side characters in these types of animes just kind of get tossed to the side and like forgotten about for
right.
a while. But like I do appreciate they're continuously going, like the cast keeps expanding, but they still keep paying them like enough attention that it feels weighty, even if like the main there's like the main five, but we barely saw them in like the last 2 or 3 episodes, right?
Who are the main five? Deku, Uraraka, Ida, Bakugo, Todoroki. I'm just guessing.
Yeah. Deku, Bakugo, Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, and then I guess All Might counts as well, because he's kind of like the force that ties it all together. What do you think of All Might? Because he's very clearly supposed to be like a larger than life character that like really.
I like All Might a lot. I think All Might is great. All Might is voiced in the dub by Christopher Sabat, who voices Vegeta in Dragon Ball Z, which I love, and he's great. And I know I'm supposed to love like the English.
Well, it's not. Well, yeah. Oh, the English. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, this is what a friend of the
Oklahoma
pod, Akshay, said that I should watch the dub so that I could fall in love with All Might's English. And I definitely do appreciate All Might's voice in the subs, just because it is so clearly a I almost think it's like a parody, but it's like a very like heartfelt parody.
Yeah.
In a way of the kind of very typical, like he is supposed to be like a Superman, and like an Americanized kind of like character and point of view sort of thing. But I like All Might a lot. I think All Might is complex and he's interesting. I think he is basic in a lot of ways, and doesn't have like, I think the archetype is Superman, but also a very uncomplex Superman in a lot of ways. And his relationship with Deku is very straightforward.
Sure.
Which is fine. They execute on like all of the plot points and everything like that, but I guess I just find it sort of like, in a lot of ways, predictable.
Sure.
Because which I think is natural, just because I think that this is sort of a first, right? This is a lot of the relationship between the Batman and Robin in the Batman the Animated Series, which was like the first of these superhero shows to really like make it big or whatever, and that that's kind of just like, like that's kind of normal. And I have grown as a viewer, I have grown out of the simplicity of this relationship more than the simplicity of that relationship is bad, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel that. I definitely get what you're going for. I also think that, like, I don't know, like, obviously there's the trend in American media is to make the heroes either a little bit more sarcastic or a little bit more gritty, right? Like in the DC type stuff. And like, obviously they're much more bright in this show, especially like, I don't think the morality of the show is incomplex. I think the morality of All Might is, because he's supposed to be I don't think this show would work as well if All Might wasn't as kind of like the Boy Scout that he is, right? Like he's
sure, yeah. But the relationship he has with Deku is very straightforward and uncomplex.
Sure.
Interestingly, like the relationship he has with other characters, like Bakugo, obviously comes to a head at about season 3. Though I have some hot takes about season 3 and All Might and Bakugo. And I think that because we've been dealing with superheroes since the 40s in America, they are a much more, like, the relationship between a hero and a sidekick is a lot more complex just because of time. You can't kind of get away with sort of that straightforward, uncomplex relationship. But I think this is something new for Japanese audiences, right? And in a lot of ways new for anime audiences, even in other kind of like quote unquote superhero anime, right? Like Japanese culture has a rich tradition of superhero shows, but they are superhero shows in the vein of Power Rangers. And so a lot of the, sidekicks and these, villains and fighting crime and all of that kind of stuff is specifically like Americanized in Boku no Hero Academia, which is sort of why I think that it's an unfair comparison to compare to like Young Justice, right? Young Justice deconstructs this actually, because Superboy is a main character and he is off-put by Superman's relation. Like, Superman gets cloned. That is the origin of Superboy, right? And Superman doesn't become a mentor figure. He has no idea what to do with the fact that a government body was cloning him against his will, and he's kind of put out and disgusted by Superboy, and that is something that reflects poorly on Superboy, who has a tough time dealing with the fact that the person who is ostensibly his father is so unwilling to kind of like deal with him or whatever. So I think that there's a lot more complexity in that kind of a relationship, right? But I think you can only earn that complexity because we have seen, however many years of an uncomplex relationship between Batman and Robin, Aquaman and Aqualad, Green Arrow and Speedy, any of the superhero sidekick relationships in sort of the same way that we see with All Might and Deku.
Yeah, I think part of that might also be intentional, though. Like, it feels like that relationship's just supposed to be very straightforward, for like what I think is supposed to be kind of like homage reasons, right? Like, I feel like All Might's supposed to be like a 40s era superhero in a lot of ways.
No, that's exactly what I mean. I think he is kind of an introduction of that archetype in a way,
sure,
to Japan. Even the fact that he is kind of also the point of like, Superman is a lot more complex than people give him credit for, especially in these adaptations, right? Superman in Young Justice has a very weird relationship with his clone, which gets a bunch of screen time. Superman in Justice League is a paragon who's very stubborn, and he believes he's always, right, but he gets put in these positions where he is definitively wrong, and that creates an interesting dynamic between kind of like him and the team. Superman in his own show gets put in those kinds of situations all the time, and so like. And also in other versions of this, like there's a comic book called Invincible, which is a very good comic book, which is kind of its own superhero universe, and it's about the teenage son of essentially the Superman character in that universe. Well, the Superman character in that universe turns out to be, spoilers for Invincible, turns out to be a secret alien invader who is doing advanced recon scouting work, and then when he's activated by his alien overlords, murders the rest of the Justice League and tries to take over the planet or whatever. And in fact, and so I feel like a lot of the time the All Might character gets deconstructed, right? He's deconstructed by Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen. There's another series called Astro City that has a character called I think he's just called Samaritan, or maybe Good Samaritan, who is the Superman character who deals with the fact that he is fundamentally incapable of having a life because the only thing he can do is jet around the globe rescuing people, and there is no way that he can have an alter ego or anything along those lines, because any moment he takes to sleep, somebody could be dying, right? There's a lot of these kinds of there are a lot more complex relationships with this kind of character in Western like media and animation than in Japan, and so I feel like this is the prototypical and archetypical Superman all good character that is All Might, and I think that I don't know, I think that's fine. I like All Might, though my hot take is that he should have died in his fight with All for One.
So I do want to kind of push back on, like, we'll get to that in a second, because that is a very hot take. But I do want to push back a little bit on the idea that this show lacks those kinds of relationships, because I think it clearly does, right? You see that those kinds of more complex relationships in the relationship between Endeavor and his son Todoroki.
Definitely. I'm specifically mean around All Might.
Yeah. Right. I mean, but you made this point. This is like, for some reason, like a Japanese culture that is unfamiliar maybe with the with the trope, but I think they are, and they just express those kind of more complex relationships, like Endeavor, like the best genist with Bakugo, even though that's short, with even All for One with Shigaraki, I think is pretty rocky.
Yeah, I see. I think those are all I would be willing to. There isn't a normal relationship in Young Justice. The normal relationship is kind of implied by all of the other media that you walk into the show with. But there is a normal relationship. Like, the first kind of mentor-sidekick relationship we get is with All Might and Deku,
sure.
And that is well established by the time that they start riffing on it. And I think that stuff like Todoroki and his father and stuff like Bakugo and Best Jeanist are reflections of the All Might Deku relationship more than they are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Although we do also we very early get Eraserhead with kind of the class.
I love Eraserhead. I think Eraserhead is fucking great.
Yeah, no, he's. So who are your favorite characters kind of overall? I'm curious.
Okay, so my number one favorite character is Bakugo, because he is the best. He's so cool. I also like Todoroki a lot. I like Yaoyorozu a lot, though I don't like the fan service inherent in her character. And I guess I like Kirishima just because he comes with like the Bakugo package. That's like my big four.
Okay.
I would say. And then for like the adults, I love Eraserhead. I love All Might. Best Jeanist was great. So yeah. Those are my feelings. Those are my characters.
Yeah, no, I'm a big Ida fan. I'm a big Froppy fan.
I would be a big Froppy fan. That makes so much sense. I also know you're a big Ida fan.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of a big Deku fan just because like I like the tactician characters, and he's like the best kind of implementation of that in the show. Although I'm less.
Okay, I have to actually kind of criticize that a little bit because, boy, I actually think that I like Bakugo better as a tactician character because I like that he is a tactician that is paired with the hyper aggressive kind of ruthless archetype, which very typically translates in sort of like shonen anime to being all emotion, you know, and he doesn't think through his fights, and he is never tactical. I love that Bakugo is always thinking tactically, even as he is pairing that with like this insanely high desire to win and to beat somebody down, right? Which so that like that's I think an interesting sort of tactician character. I also think that some of the tactician aspects of Deku
are you going to talk about the kicking thing? Because I will agree with you on that.
The kick thing is okay. So this is the kick thing. They spent a whole episode on this.
Yeah,
where they're like working on All For One, and Deku finds out. He's like, "Oh no, I can't use my arms." And then he's like, what am I gonna do? How am I gonna be a superhero? and then All Might is like, "You have to, you're trying to be me. You have to think outside the box, Deku." And Deku's like, "You're right. I do need to think outside the box." And by the end of the episode, like, the really clever idea that he came up with is to kick people instead of to punch them. Oh my god, what? Like, I don't know. It was probably that it was framed like such a super clever epiphany. Like, it was like, oh, I'm so smart. Nobody ever would have thought of this. How am I gonna do things without my arms? I'll do them with my legs. That like made it so funny to me. I just burst out laughing. I thought that was so funny.
I totally get that. And I think a big part of that too is that like this is also the episode where we're seeing these other characters develop their ultimate moves, which are pretty clever, right? Like like Bakugo's he does the armor piercing one in that one, right? Or is it the bunch of little blasts? Mm-hmm. I forget which. And then like what is it, like Ida starts to develop his like hyper kick a little bit more, which is I think a pretty clever application. And like what there's some other ones too, right? Where like we kind of get like these actual clever applications of abilities. We see this also a little bit later, like with who's the new the big three character, like the main, All Might 2, the guy who looks like Tintin.
There's also, who's the guy with I can't remember his name, with Dark Shadow, where he like wears Dark Shadow. That's an interesting application, right? It's not, it's something that you don't necessarily think of, and you're like, oh wow, that's actually like very cool. Fucking Abyss Black, whatever it's called, and he's going to become a melee fighter instead of a whatever. Like, I think that those are very interesting ultimate moves. But that the capstone, the climax of the episode, is Deku figuring out that his ultimate move is kicking people instead of punching them. I lost it. I just couldn't. That was so funny.
I do want to point out that I do love the relationship between who is it? What's the Red Riot? Kirishima and. What's the character's name? It's Tetsu, the steel guy. Just the fact they're like basically the same people. Oh
yeah, they have the same powers. Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty funny. I like Kirishima a lot, actually. Like, I like that Kirishima. I think that the best character in the series is Bakugo, and a lot of that comes from the subversion of the typical archetypes that this character sort of falls into.
Yeah.
Like, typically he's a loner, but in this one, no. Like, he does have his own friend group.
I think Kirishima is supposed to be the stand-in for like this, like the worst aspects of it, because Kirishima sometimes does go over the top and doesn't think about what he's doing and jumps in. I think he's supposed to kind of fill in that role.
And I like how the ruthless and relentless character is not completely lacking of strategy and tactics, right? Like, there's the part in the tournament arc where he goes up there and he says, "I just want to let you all know I'm gonna win," or whatever, and everybody freaks out. And I think Todoroki is the one. He's like, no, he did that to put everybody off kilter, and to rile them up. But he is completely that was a tactical strategic move. That wasn't like a move of arrogance or something like that. And he's constantly doing stuff like this, right? And I think that that's great. But he is also still very naturally. The reason I like him is he's that like Vegeta character who is typically more interesting than Deku / Goku or whatever, because he has more baggage to kind of like work through, and these kinds of flaws. He just, there's I am I'm always sort of skeptical about characters like Deku and like Goku because they are so sort of, like they are so sort of central and they are so sort of powerful. That I don't know. So I like Bakugo a lot. I think Bakugo is the best.
I do like the kind of dynamic that they set up during their fight. That's why I really wanted you to watch episode 61. Is I think their fight there, which they clearly blew the entire budget for the season on that fight scene because it's better animated than anything else in the season.
Yeah.
Is like the kind of like dynamic. I think I agree with you that Deku's kind of like boring on his own, but I think his dynamic with Bakugo, I think, elevates the both of them. And kind of like the way it's like, they are, even though they're not like the class representatives, they're not like the best in the class, they are kind of like a lot of the driving force behind how the class behaves because they're both exceptional in their own ways, and they're always pushing everybody else. I think that's a really neat theme to kind of explore.
So to be honest with you, I think that the genius of the most recent season and the most recent couple of episodes is in recognizing that Deku and Bakugo have a lot to learn from one another sort of equally, right? That it kind of deconstructs this idea that all you need to do to be a hero is be selfless and want to save people. And I like that All Might doesn't let Deku off the hook for losing. Where he's like, no, it is important to win, and Bakugo's kind of, sort of, completely dogmatic allegiance to ambition and victory is another important part of being a hero. You can't save people if you lose against the villains, kind of thing.
Right.
And I like that wasn't just assumed. This is actually something that I might otherwise criticize about, Western superhero archetypes where where like Superman never has a conversation with Supergirl or whoever about how it's important to beat the heroes or to beat the villains. It's kind of just a foregone conclusion, right? And so it is always sort of about like saving people. That's kind of like the only axis on which this stuff gets decided. But I like that there was kind of equal focus on either side of that. It's like these are two people that are sort of yin and yang, and they need to come together and learn from one another in order to become the next All Might, if that is indeed what they're looking to do, sort of thing.
I will say I did turn a corner on Bakugo when the fucking the meatball character from was it Shinketsu, the other school, who was like, this is meant to weed people out, and I'm going to weed you all out because you're all inferior. And then like Bakugo's just like, fuck you. Like
Yeah.
Except he had a really great line for it. What was it? It's like he's like too blind to see talent. It was a really great line that I'm sad I can't remember, but he expressed it really cleverly.
I like that. I like that Bakugo got kidnapped by the villains, and then the villains were like, "Come join our team," and Bakugo's like, "No, you fucking losers!" I was pretty sure that was going to happen in a certain sense. Just because there was a long history of Bakugo being a deconstruction of this kind of trope, and obviously the trope would have been that Bakugo joins the bad guys. Apparently Sasuke did this.
In Naruto.
And so I loved that moment and that piece of it. But I definitely do think that All Might should have died in the fight against All for One. I think it would have heightened all of this drama, and I sort of like the idea that Bakugo and Deku self-actualize rather than are taught by All Might. And I also think that All Might dying weighs heavier on Bakugo than just All Might being forced into retirement by saving him, because that's the baggage he's carrying in episode 61 with Deku, is this failure that he feels because it was his capture that led to All Might having to retire from superheroics, and so a version of things where instead of that, All Might is dead and he got his hero killed, right? That I think is better and more dramatic.
I think the issue there is that, like, I don't know. I feel like one that might be a big cultural touchstone point, right? Like that they want to keep him around. First of all, I think there also might be like kind of like straight up like a merchandising aspect to that, right? Like All Might is like super popular, and actually killing him off might be a problem. Two, like I don't know, I feel like that learning from All Might is a thing that they really want to push because they didn't get to explore that too far. I get what you're saying, and I think it definitely would be appropriate. I think what they're angling for, though, eventually is like All for One, like tricks him in some way, and like and brings about like that's the actual like that's when he dies is like under some other circumstance. I don't know, but I definitely see your point, and I definitely respect that opinion. I don't know. I don't know if it would have made it that much better because he's effectively out of commission as a superhero.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the plans are. I obviously haven't read the manga.
I haven't either.
Like that. And I don't, keep track of that. I know a friend of the cast, Warren, does, and so maybe he has some kind of like deeper insight to it. And in a certain sense, I think it's actually kind of in keeping with sort of the deconstructionist aspects of the show. Like, so Jeff through Mother's Basement had a whole thing about the fight between All for One and All Might. And in it, he described the fight as a Vader versus Obi-Wan moment. And so in Vader versus Obi-Wan dies, you know? And so hypothetically, All Might just being depowered is also its own kind of like deconstruction of that kind of thing. So, But I don't know. I was really hoping he would die. I was really hoping that he'd get killed because I think that would have really like ratcheted up the drama. The tough thing would have been Kobe going into just sort of like, the normal school year and we're moving the dorms right off of that kind of thing. In a certain sense, I almost sort of feel like the show has gets a little bit of whiplash from that because a lot of times it will come off of these like incredibly dramatic hyper sort of soap opera episodes and come into very sort of slice of life anime episodes. Oh, who has the best room? Let's have a competition or whatever. Like, how the fuck do you do that when All Might just lost like all of his power by punching All for One super hard in the face with United States of Smash, like,
I think part of that too though is that like we were watching these in relatively quick succession, and like I feel like that happens at like the season break where like you've got like real world time to cool down from that.
That's true.
And coming.
I also think that I also think that the show does a pretty good job of sort of like balancing these two aspects. I think that's why it spends a lot of time doing the sports, the tournament arc in the sports arena, even though I think the tournament arcs are bad. Like that in the licensing exam, like, the stakes of those situations are pretty low, and the stakes of the show itself are pretty low generally. And then they like kind of ratchet up all of a sudden, kind of out of nowhere, right? It ratchets up with Stain. It ratchets up with the first attack with like the no moves. It ratchets up with All for One. And so, the show is overall pretty good about that balancing act between we're just a bunch of normal teenagers like you in your high school and, the Shakespearean melodrama of All for One defeating the symbol of peace or whatever.
Yeah, I do want to touch on a couple more things before we get out of our main section. One, on the kind of like normal teenager things, I want to say that I think that the romance is bad, and I don't know how they can make it better.
The romance between Uraraka and
Deku presumably.
Yeah.
I think the most interesting part of it is like the villain, whatever the villain, the blood sucking villain's name is. Her being like
she's posing as Cammy,
or like her just being creepy, right? Like her being like I'm a creepy stalker of Deku, and this like causing weird feelings in Uraraka. I think that's the most interesting aspect of it, but I still don't think it's good. And the other thing I did want to talk about, maybe a little bit more length, is that I appreciate the fact that like usually you get like one set of villains, either villains that are like totally despicable or villains that are like have like a point, and they've got both sets of those in this show. And the fact that like the evil ones are like trying to take advantage of like the legacy of Stain, to recruit more like like more quote unquote honorable villains. I think is great. I really like that aspect because like like Stain has kind of a point. Maybe he's not justified in the way he goes about it. And like what's like the turtle guy and a couple of the other heroes are like, yes, this is the way that things should be. And then like the asshole, I can't remember the One for All's apprentice's name, but he's like, yeah, we can leverage this to get more people into our organization. I think that's pretty great.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I don't know. I am a little bit mixed on that. I do wish that there was more kind of complexity with the villains, in terms of like just goals in what they're actually like working towards. Because it just kind of feels like everybody who just wants to kill All Might, in the League of Villains, and I'm like, man, aren't there more interest? Like they have personality, right? But I feel like they're all kind of unified by something that is functionally pretty weak, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I think that again. I think that's part of the point, right? Like there are some people who are just like assholes. There's some people who have like a point to make about the society they're in. And I sort of think
that this is more just kind of you need to establish what the trope is before you deconstruct it. Like the villains in typical sort of shonen anime and in typical superhero like Japanese superhero stuff don't look a lot like this, and so maybe you just kind of need to ask. Well, actually, I guess superhero and shonen anime actually do look like maybe that's what it is. It just kind of inherits the like, well, I'm a villain because I want to defeat the hero, and so the thing that defines Cell or that defines Frieza or that defines Majin Buu really is just that they want to kill. They just want to kill Goku. Like they are fairly uncomplex. In what they're like looking to do and looking to accomplish. Stain is very nice. I agree with you. I think Stain is great. I'm talking specifically about like the League of Villains kind of collective.
Yeah, and they have their points. Like I'm pretty sure Shigaraki's going to be a version of like that kid from the training camp. By the way, I bawled my eyes out at the end of that of the where Deku saves the kid. I don't know. I cry a lot at this show. I really like it.
Oh really?
Yeah. But I think a big part of it too is that like, or like we also saw like twice, right? Like he's obviously got some deeper stuff going on, right? Like he's like broken in a way that like he can't function in the society as a normal person, but the villains are willing to accept him as he is. Like that's the point he makes, and even though it's not really backed up so much, I feel like that's going to be the focus of this fourth season.
I'm actually really interested also by like I actually like sort of business type villains or whatever. So I'm very interested by this guy who like runs the black market, like the one guy without the one tooth or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's not like a villain, but like he kind of supplies the other sorts of villains. And you get the sense that they're like for all that there are heroes, right? And for all the kind of structure and infrastructure that support a kind of hero society, that there is kind of like a dark mirror opposite to that for sort of villains. You get a little bit of that with like Twice's thing at the end of the third season, and I'm very interested to see kind of what that looks like, because I am a big fan of watching villains team up. Like I think the kind of natural trope is that villains can never team up because they're all too egotistical to ever work with one another. And I find that a lot less interesting than a version of things where Lex Luthor, Vandal Savage, and the Joker all, get on the same team.
Yeah. I'm down with that. Yeah. Man, I don't know. I really like this show. I know that a lot of the emotional manipulation in the show is kind of like obvious, but sometimes I like being emotionally manipulated, and I definitely like being emotionally manipulated by this show. It gives me nice feels in my tummy.
Yeah, I get into the very hype aspects of the show. Like basically, anytime Bakugo is on screen, I get super hype. Bakugo versus Todoroki was awesome, and you know.
I love that fight specifically because like Baku gets robbed of a true win. I love that so much. It's like no one's happy, everything's terrible, but everybody's cheering on screen anyway.
Even Bakugo and Uraraka, like, oh god, man, I got so into that fight just because, you know, it is such a reversal. I was so sure Uraraka was going to win that because this was kind of before I really saw, you know, like, because I didn't like the first season. I was kind of like coming off of that in a lot of ways, and so I was like, oh, and this is where Uraraka beats Bakugo and he gets humble. It's like, no, like Uraraka is really clever and she thinks out this like really awesome strategy, and Bakugo is just like, no, fuck you, I'm more powerful than you, and I'm gonna kick your ass every day of the week. Yeah. Well, I was like, yes, get him, Bakugo, do it. Like,
and you still get good character development out of Uraraka, right? Like,
yeah.
Who like the most interesting part of her character is you know, her motivation is like money, but in a way that isn't terrible. You know, there's a lot of that, like a lot of like heroes that you don't expect to self-actualizing, like fucking naval laser guy, like he is the most throwaway.
Oh my god,
hero.
What? Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't really like the exam part a ton. I liked a little bit of it, like, you know, with Todoroki and whatever, but I thought that in general it was a lot less interesting, I guess, than some of the other pieces of like the sports festival or whatever. And but yeah, when the naval laser guy like uses his beam to like, you know, get Ida and all of the people who hadn't succeeded in the exam yet together, I was just like, wow, that's actually kind of awesome.
Yeah.
You know? Even like Kirishima, I love the moment where Deku specifically brings Kirishima because he knows that Bakugo will only come for a friend, right?
Yeah.
And like, so those kinds of moments where, you know, the smaller characters get kind of or like when Yaoyorozu outsmarts the caffeine lady or whatever. I love that part. I think Yaoyorozu is great, though. I also, like I said, I don't like the fan servicey aspect of. I think it's so lame. I don't know. I probably wouldn't think it was so lame if they didn't highlight it so much.
Yeah, I get that.
I don't know.
And like the Annie voice guy, like he even gets his like moment to shine. Like it's like, what, you know, like what is your power actually? Oh, I can talk to animals. Well, do it then. You know, it's I don't know. I think I don't know. I do appreciate they give everybody their moment to shine. The highlight of the licensing exam to me wasn't necessarily the actual action. It was like the introduction of all these cool new characters from different schools, right? Like I am in love with what's his name, the guy with the wind powers.
Everybody loves him apparently. See, this is actually kind of one of the interesting parts. Yeah, because so my character was Bakugo, and I like loved Bakugo from the first minute. But I also have a lot of friends at my work who watch the show, and I was talking with them about it, and they also all love Bakugo. Everybody at work thinks Bakugo and Todoroki are the best, and Deku's just kind of like, whatever, you know. And so I was very interested when I told you that Bakugo was the best, and you were like, no, Bakugo's a fucking asshole. Because that was different than different than all of the feedback that I had gotten.
Sure.
But the other thing was that everybody also really likes this wind guy, and that he is now best boy.
Yurashi. Yeah.
Boy. Yeah.
I think he hits a lot of like the right pieces, right? Like he's goofy. He's not around enough, so we can always kind of like play into a shtick without having to like worry about it too much. He also gets his kind of self-actualization moment very, very quickly. It's within like the 5 episodes of the licensing exam. And he's like the only one from that school that really gets that. All that kind of stuff. You know, because he has his kind of like conflict with Todoroki like immediately. I also really, I think part of it too is like that school's aesthetic I think is really great. Like I love like the hats and jackets. Like it's just like so much of what I love. Like I am so in love with that, and he's like the best character from that school. With the exception of maybe Extendo hair, which I think which I like. It's so like talk about like a goofy quirk that like gets applied creatively. I love Extendo hair for that. Like, but yeah, we've gone on like an hour and 10 minutes about this. Did you have any closing thoughts about
my closing thoughts? Do I have any closing thoughts. I think that this is a good show. I am glad that I've seen it, even if I think it's a little bit basic sometimes. I don't know. I'm really interested to see. I think the intersection between shonen anime and kind of westernized superheroes is really interesting, and I think that that's the thing that ultimately like makes me like this show a lot. Is looking at Western animation, like looking at the way these two things kind of interact and pulling them apart and seeing how they work. I think that that's like really cool and really interesting.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I really like the show too. I really like the subversion elements, and I like the characters a lot, and I like the emotional moments. So it's a great show. But other than that, how was your week?
How was my week? I did have something to talk about this week, but now I can't fucking remember what it was. Like I watched something and I was like, oh, I need to tell Mango all about this thing that I watched, but now I can't remember what it was. How was your week? What have you been up to? What have you been watching?
A couple different things. The thing I watched I wanted to talk about was I watched Mandy with Nicolas Cage, which is a weird movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard that it's super weird. I haven't gone to the movies in a while, actually.
I watch it streaming because it's available streaming. It's like a 2 hours of an 80s fever dream, and like I don't know if I want to say it's good, but it's definitely interesting, right? Like it's a revenge kind of flick, right? Like somebody, a thing happens and like that, it's like played that it's like a revenge movie. But at the 2 hour movie, the moment that necessitates revenge comes at the 1 hour mark, and he really starts his revenge at the 1:15 mark. It's like, it's a lot. It's a very slow paced movie, which is great for kind of like seeping in the aesthetic. But I was like, I kept like looking up and being like, this is still happening, and there's only like 45 minutes. When is he actually going to get to like the stuff that they put in the trailer or whatever, right? And it works, but it's very different. I'm also playing an open world game with towers that you need to very quickly. It came to open world game with towers that you need to explore areas. Can you guess which one I'm talking about?
With towers and you need to explore areas, like, so that's a Ubisoft thing.
Yeah, I'm basically the joke is that I'm describing like every open world game.
No, I know. I'm just trying to. I'm just trying to think. What open world game would you have been playing? Is it like an older game?
It's about a year old at this point. That should give it mostly away.
It's about a year old at this point.
Maybe a year and a half. This point.
Oh wait, is it Shadow of Mordor? Shadow of War?
No, it's not Shadow of War, which I did beat.
Does that? I remember the first one.
It does.
Towers.
It does have towers. I'm talking about Breath of the Wild.
Oh wow! I didn't actually know Breath of the Wild had towers. That's funny. Have you ever played Breath of the Wild before?
Sorry.
Have you ever played Breath of the Wild before?
I played it for like 15 minutes on a plane, and I had to stop because it was giving me plane sickness for some reason. I think there was something else there, but I put in like a handful of hours into it, and it's fun. It's got like the same kind of like with we were talking about or I was talking about how like there's a secret behind every corner in Super Mario Odyssey. It's got kind of those same kind of things, but I don't think it fits as well into Zelda as it does into Mario. And I don't think the game is perfect, but I do think it solves a problem that I have with these types of games, which is because there's no skill tree, you don't kind of like hit this point where you power up all the way and everything suddenly becomes like super easy. I think that honestly the weapons breaking is a big part of that, and even though it's kind of annoying, it's really necessary to keep the flow of that game right. Which is it's like a fascinating design problem, right? Like it's like I said, it's not a super great experience, but it's an experience, like it makes the game is better for it, even if like it's annoying kind of in kind of the implementation. I don't know. I'm just really fascinated by how that plays itself out. I've also been playing a lot of Crusader Kings 2 with some of friends of the cast. Just really.
Yeah, I've seen that. How's that going?
It's going pretty well. I really love that like you can like just get like screwed by like random stuff, right? Like it's obviously not a game you play just to win. Like you play the game to experience the whole thing, kind of like feel the story that you're telling with yourself. Even though there's like, there are objectives to push towards, but like just like even when things go poorly, it's still like it's still fun. I don't know. I just I'm really embracing that aspect of it.
Cool. Fair enough. I do want to bring up a piece of um, feedback that we got from friend of the cast, John, tweeted at us in a conversation about our episode last week. He said, "Also, y'all kind of touch on people only play what they're comfortable with. It'd be interesting to have an ep where you examine if y'all personally have walled off a particular genre or play style, why you have these walls, and if they should still be there." And at the risk of cannibalizing that future episode topic, I do want to hit on that piece of feedback. What did you think about that? Do you have anything? Did you have like an immediate answer to
Oh
that?
yeah. It's
Okay.
it's real time strategy games.
Interesting.
I'm really not good at multitasking, and you really need to be able to multitask in order to do well at RTSs.
Right. So you're working on your economy at the same time you're fighting a battle.
Yeah, and like I'm fine with doing those things if I can do them kind of in tandem, like in a turn-based game, or like Crusader Kings, I guess, is technically real time strategy.
But it's also a lot less twitch.
Yeah, it's
when,
slower.
When you're trying to, you don't. There's nothing to micro in Crusader Kings.
And not only that, but like Crusader Kings is also not about like. It's not a competitive multiplayer game. Like the same things that make the game great in kind of its looseness and its it's like lack of fairness, in a lot of ways, and like it's, the fact that you're experiencing it rather than necessarily trying to win it all the time lets you, if you're not doing great at some of the other at some of the aspects of the game, it doesn't ruin the experience. Like I could imagine a game that is slow paced that you still need to be like hitting the marks right on time or you're behind or whatever. And I think that kind of can happen in like a Civ game, right? Where you miss something by a couple of turns because you're not paying super close attention to everything that you're doing. And I think that's I don't know if I want to call it a flaw. Maybe I will. But like, I'm okay with that in Civ because I have all the time in the world to figure out if that's going to happen. Same thing in like what's the name of the game? XCOM. Stuff like that. And so like that combined with just like the real time element just always gets me, and like the fact that I'm not fast enough, combined with like not only am I not good at multitasking, I kind of hate it. So like it really doesn't work for me. I don't know. And I feel like that's something relatively indelible about me that maybe like I don't know if I'll ever get there. It's not like I can't appreciate them, but like it's just not a genre for me. What about you, buddy? You have anything that comes to mind?
My initial answer was something like JRPGs, but I don't know how much that actually holds up to scrutiny. Like I just haven't played a lot of JRPGs, and I kind of bet I would like them. I actually got the most recent Dragon Quest is
11, the new one that everybody's on about.
Yeah. Because I was thinking about it because, like Shadow of the Tomb Raider came out, and I just got both of those together. But I think what it actually sort of might be would be like a kind of competitive shooter a la Modern Warfare, whatever the most recent Call of Duty, just kind of a deathmatch shooter like that. I've never gotten into those kinds of games, and I sort of wonder what they would look like, or what it would look like if I did. My other big one is sort of like platformers, kind of in the vein of like Super Meat Boy and stuff like that. I don't have the same. I never played the NES version of like platformers. My first console was a PlayStation 2, and I feel like the first big console generation that I was a part of was the N64 era, where 2D platformers had really gone by the wayside. So I feel like all of these retro platformers that have come out, like your Hollow Knights, your Shovel Knights, your Super Meat Boys, any of those kinds of ones are platformers that I just don't have the muscle memory for because I didn't build it when I was a kid. Just like replaying Super Mario Bros. 3 over and over, or whatever whatever the game is, sort of. And so I feel like those are the genres that I typically don't like interact with in the same sort of way that I interact with like strategy games or conventional RPGs, like Western RPGs or stuff like that.
Are you a fan of Metroidvanias?
I am okay, I think, with Metroidvanias, because I never I think that there were more of those kinds of games, especially for like the PlayStation 2, that people want to give credit for, and I remember playing a lot of those kinds of like, like licensed knockoff, sort of like the Lion King game or something like that.
I don't think Lion King really counts as a Metroidvania. That is
maybe not the Lion King specifically, but a sort of, a 2D actioner kind of game like that.
Yeah. It's curious because, like, I feel like Hollow Knight's pretty Metroidvania, like very Metroidvania actually. And you mentioned the same breath as these platformers, and well, they obviously share a lot of the same DNA. I was curious if you had like if you had have you ever like dealt into like any of like the more classic examples like Symphony of the Night or
No, yeah, see, I haven't done Symphony of the Night. The first Metroid game I played all of the Metroid Prime games,
right?
But they're amazing.
They're
3D. They're 3D.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you? It's kind of in general. Do you play a lot of 2D games at all?
I guess not really. To be honest with you. Yeah, I guess not really. I guess I just kind of don't.
Yeah.
Like if I look at all of the games. I mean, no, yeah, I guess I just really don't.
Yeah, well, that's the
like,
way
there's isometric games in here. Like I'm looking at Pillars of Eternity,
Sure.
Shadowrun,
Factorio.
Factorio, BattleTech, Banner Saga. But these are all isometric. I guess Darkest Dungeon is a 2D game technically, but
true.
that really does not count in a real sense. I'm just looking at all of the games that I have installed on my PC right now.
So you did mention Banner Saga. I picked up Ash of God's Redemption and played that for about an hour, which is basically Banner Saga, but like by a different dev and like by a Russian dev that like can't like got a bad English translator because the dialogue in the game is fucking terrible. And I can't.
Is it?
Yeah. But it looks just like Banner Saga, just so much to the fact that I thought like,
oh my god, I'm looking at it right now.
My favorite part is like one of the quotes they have on like the Steam page is like a quote from the Banner Saga guys.
I love the Banner Saga. The Banner Saga was my favorite game in 2014, 2015 or something.
Have you played 2 and 3?
I have not played 2 and 3, though I've purchased both of them. What I always want to do is I want to play through 1 again, because it's a very deep universe with all of this lore, and I always want to play through Banner Saga 1 before I go through and continue with Banner Saga 2 and 3. And then I like do my playthrough of 1, and I typically don't finish it, and I'm like, well, that's enough Banner Saga for me. I've done this literally 4 times.
Yeah, okay.
where I have where I've kind of like restarted the Banner Saga to try it over again. So yeah. By the way, the thing that I have been watching that I wanted to tell you about, but I couldn't remember what it was fucking Young Justice, because I'm an idiot. Which I mentioned in the cast. I basically watched the first season of Young Justice over again once I finished Boku no Hero, and I was waiting for episode 63 to come out. I was just like, I just need to watch Young Justice. That show is so good. And that show is so good. I'm sure we will have to talk about it when the new season comes out in the beginning of next year. Great. The producers behind it are very kind of like famous. It's a guy named Greg Weisman and Brandon Vietti. And Greg Weisman is actually, he's like been around for a long time. He did the Gargoyles show. Did you ever watch that show with Keith David and like Goliath?
I'm aware of it. I never really watched it, I don't think.
Okay, yeah, he did that. He did The Spectacular Spider-Man is what like introduced me to him in a real way, which is an insanely good show that only ended because of like weird contract dispute, like bullshit. He actually did some World of Warcraft stuff, interestingly enough. They hired him on just as like a writer for like a children's series of novels that are apparently very good and well received. I also think he did Star Wars Rebels. I just want to check that really quickly because It is he was part of the team, though a smaller part of the team. It looks like he was just an executive producer. He wasn't really. This apparently is the brainchild of Simon Kinberg, who is the guy that basically does the X-Men, universe, like the film universe. He's actually directing the new one that's coming out, Dark Phoenix. Yeah, okay. Greg Weisman left the show after season 1.
Okay.
Yeah, but he's the best. He's really good, and he makes good shows, and that's it. Yep, that's all. Just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, I might have to give that a watch at some point. I don't know. I don't watch a ton of TV shows, but you know, I should give it a look.
We will definitely. We will absolutely get into it. I'm sure later down the line when
the new season comes out.
Yeah, when the new season comes out, because I mean, Young Justice is interesting because it's one of those shows that was not super popular at its like time, but has like an insane internet following. And people have been trying to bring it back. Like the first idea was to bring it back through Netflix, because Netflix was getting tons of watches on it or whatever. And so like Young Justice fans were basically just marathoning the show over and over and over again to show Netflix that they like loved it and everything. And then Netflix actually did commission it, but then like Warner Brothers was like, you know what, we think that this is good enough to go in our new DC universe like subscription service, and so they pulled it to be a part of that
alongside of the live action Teen Titans show.
Yeah, alongside of the Fuck Batman show, which I'm so excited for. You know, I bought the DC Universe thing because the interesting thing about the DC Universe package is that it's not just that. It also includes kind of like the Marvel Unlimited sort of comics.
Okay,
it's not the whole breadth of you know comics. There's a lot of holes in that collection. Like my personal collection has way more comics in it than the DC Universe stuff does, but it has a lot of interesting stuff, and it has a lot of like really good stuff. And the thing that made me that really sold me on it was actually the 75 issues written by Peter David of Aquaman, where his hand gets cut off and he gets the harpoon or whatever. I was very happy that they had like that whole run, because I think it's super good.
Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of am wary of that service because like I'm not excited for that Teen Titans thing. It looks.
I am not. I definitely don't want to. I definitely don't want to talk it up. It is, even with comics and like movies, because it has like, you know, it has a bunch of the, you know, like the Dark Knight trilogy. It has all of these animated movies. Actually, the DC animated movies are very good, kind of as a rule. It has the original, you know, like Teen Titans and Batman Brave and the Bold and all this other sort of stuff. But it just has way less content than something like Netflix or, you know, Hulu or whatever else.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. What else can we talk about? I have not done a ton because I've been kind of I'm without my primary PC at the moment, so it's a little bit more difficult to what's it called to share
because you've been on your laptop.
Yeah. So there's like less games I can play, less. I guess I can watch a lot of the same stuff, but I've just been busy with other things.
There have to be. What are some of the controversies that are? So this is an interesting one. How do you feel about the Telltale news that Telltale is basically trying to finish out the game, and
for Walking Dead?
Yeah, for The Walking Dead.
Because
they're going to finish it with another developer or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks for the people that they hired that they then fired, right? Like that's
because that is the overwhelming response I have seen, which is everybody's like, "What the fuck are you doing? Pay severance.
Yeah.
Don't pay another developer to like release episodes 3 and 4, you idiots."
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I also don't like something that has never been clear to me is like if those employees were like entitled to the wages that they weren't paid, absolutely, but entitled to severance. I'm not sure that they ever like severance isn't like a universal thing. I don't know. I feel like that's like a thing that
That's fair. I just kind of assume that it's like in their contracts or something like that. But
California's right to work, right? So like, you can just like you can quit or be fired for any reason at any time as long as it's not like on face for like a protected reason. So I assume that they weren't due severance. But maybe they were. I'm not. I don't know either way, so I don't want to say definitively either way. And it doesn't make it suck any less. And like I still think that the thing is like finishing it with another developer is still not great, right? Like I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, if like the choice is, if for whatever reason the choice has to be either like another studio or not coming out at all, I guess I'm happier that it's coming out than it's not. But like I would still feel shitty. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you have any strong opinions about it?
I think it is. I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting because I don't think people would have cared if the studio hadn't folded. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think this will, in a weird way, end up bolstering the sales of whatever, like episode 3 when it actually, whatever they call it, series 3, season 3, whenever it does come out. And I guess I like that it is giving the customers the service that they paid for. Like we kind of talked about, like, if you pre-order the game, I was a little bit on like the buyer beware sort of side of things, right? But I think that it is hypothetically good just because it's getting those kinds of folks the product that they paid for.
Yeah.
But yeah. The more we learn and we hear about this Telltale situation, though, like the ickier it sounds. Like the person who moved his whole family overseas the week before the company goes under and immediately loses his like work visa or whatever. Like, boy, is that shitty.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with that. Like, there's a lot of little injustices in there, and they're all terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have anything more to say about that. What about you?
Nope. I guess that's.
I don't know if I have any more to say about anything else. So,
are we gonna end a podcast on time without going like 10 minutes over?
Yeah, let's do it.
Fair enough.
If you'd like to reach us, you can reach us at podcast@subderpsplaygames.com or subderpsplaygames@gmail.com. Email us with any questions or thoughts you have about Boku no Hero Academia or any of the other things we talked about in this episode. You can follow us on twitch.tv/subderpsplaygames, even though we haven't been doing a lot. We do any thoughts on when we might be able to do the End of Hell's Rebels?
I definitely knew I couldn't do it this weekend. I'm probably going to see and start talking to folks about Hell's Rebels to see if we can set something up for next weekend or the weekend after.
Okay, awesome. So hopefully we'll be there soon. You can follow us on Twitter. You can find us on SoundCloud. Links will be in the description. Obviously, if you're watching this, you'll probably watch it, or listening to this, you'll probably listen to it on SoundCloud. If you're listening directly through the web. Otherwise, leave a review on iTunes for us, please. We would like that very much. I think that's everything I wanted to promote. Buddy, do you have anything else that you wanted to promote?
I have nothing else I'm looking to promote.
In that case, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.